I, 42M, am a father to two amazing kids, Anna, 16F, and Jake, 14M, from my first marriage. When their mother passed away 8 years ago, it turned our world upside down. She had been the glue that held our family together, and her loss left a void none of us could ever fully fill. One of the few things that brought me comfort during that dark time was knowing that my late wife had planned for our children's future. She had worked hard to leave behind a substantial inheritance, which I've managed carefully in trust funds set up solely for Anna and Jake. The money was her way of ensuring they would have opportunities she wouldn't be around to see: college, starting a business, buying a home, or even just giving them a safety net as they navigated adulthood. A few years ago, I remarried. My wife, 39F, is a wonderful woman with 2 children from her previous marriage, Ethan, 15M, and Sophie, 12F. Their father is actively involved in their lives and provides financial support, so while I've stepped into the role of a stepfather and contribute to their day-to-day needs, we've always kept the lines between financial obligations clear. I truly care about Ethan and Sophie. I've made an effort to treat them with the same care and respect as Anna and Jake, even though I came into their lives later. However, the issue of blending finances, particularly regarding Anna and Jake's trust funds, never came up until recently. A few weeks ago, my wife brought up a suggestion that blindsided me. She proposed using some of Anna and Jake's trust funds to help with Ethan and Sophie's expenses. Specifically, she mentioned extracurricular activities and future college savings. Her reasoning was that it wasn't fair for Anna and Jake to have a financial advantage when Ethan and Sophie didn't have the same opportunities. I immediately told her I couldn't do that. Those funds weren't just money, they were a promise to my late wife that her children's futures would be secure. Using them for anything other than Anna and Jake's needs would feel like betraying that promise. I also pointed out that Ethan and Sophie have their father, who provides support, and I'm more than willing to work with her on saving for their future through other means. However, my refusal upset her. She accused me of playing favorites and suggested that I didn't fully accept her children as part of the family. The conversation didn't stay between us for long. My wife brought the issue up to her parents, and they took her side. They argued that it's my duty as a stepfather to provide equally for all the kids and that treating Anna and Jake differently would breed resentment. Now, even Anna and Jake are aware of the situation, and it's created an awkward tension between them and their step-siblings. I feel torn. I love my stepchildren and want to support them, but I also feel strongly about honoring my late wife's wishes and protecting the inheritance she worked so hard to leave behind. Update 1. After my wife and I had our initial argument, I hoped the issue would settle down. I thought she might see my perspective and understand why I was so firm on this, but instead, the situation escalated. She involved her parents, which complicated things significantly. One evening, my wife's parents invited us over for dinner. It seemed like a casual family meal at first, but as soon as the kids went off to another room, they brought up the trust funds. Her father started with a passive-aggressive comment: "It must be nice for Anna and Jake to have everything handed to them." I stayed calm and explained the situation again, emphasizing that the money came from their mother and was meant solely for their futures. Her mother wasn't as diplomatic. She said, "You married into this family. These kids are your responsibility now. How do you think Ethan and Sophie will feel when they see the difference in how they're treated? It's not fair." I reiterated that I treat all the kids equally in every way I can, but this inheritance wasn't something I could compromise on. They accused me of tearing the family apart by refusing to share the money. At this point, I felt cornered and frustrated. I reminded them that Ethan and Sophie have a father who provides for them financially, and I already contribute to their day-to-day expenses. The dinner ended on a sour note. My wife was quiet on the drive home, and I could tell she was upset with me, but I didn't know how else to handle it. Things took an even more uncomfortable turn when the kids got wind of the situation. I'm not sure how much my wife told Ethan and Sophie, but they started acting differently. Ethan, who is usually outgoing and friendly, became distant. Sophie, who loves chatting about her day, started avoiding me. I asked them if something was wrong, but they both said, nothing. However, their behavior said otherwise. The hardest part came when Anna approached me one evening. She said, "Dad, are we doing something wrong? Why are Ethan and Sophie mad at us?" I reassured her that she and Jake hadn't done anything wrong, but I could see how the situation was affecting her. She started second-guessing herself, wondering if the money was causing a divide. Jake overheard our conversation and chimed in, "We didn't ask for this. Why is this even a problem?" He seemed more frustrated than Anna, but I could tell he was also hurt. I tried to shield them from the drama, but it was clear they were feeling the tension. I sat them down and explained, as gently as I could, that their mother's inheritance was a gift for their futures and that it wasn't something anyone should feel guilty about. They nodded, but the unease lingered. A few days later, my wife and I had another confrontation. She came to me with what she called a compromise. She suggested taking a small portion of Anna and Jake's trust funds, just enough to help with Ethan and Sophie's extracurricular activities for the next couple of years. I asked her, "Do you think your ex-husband would agree to this if the situation were reversed? If Ethan and Sophie had an inheritance, would he let me take from it for Anna and Jake?" She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she accused me of being overly protective of Anna and Jake and not trusting her judgment. That hit a nerve. I told her it wasn't about trust, it was about respecting the wishes of a woman who isn't here to defend her decisions. I reminded her that this money was her way of being present in her kids' lives, even after death. The argument ended with her storming out of the room. Feeling stuck, I decided to approach Ethan and Sophie directly. I wanted to make sure they knew I cared about them and wasn't playing favorites. Ethan was the first to open up. He admitted, "I don't care about the money. I just feel like you don't see me the same way you see Anna and Jake." His words hit me hard. I asked him why he felt that way, and he said, "You always talk about their future, their college plans, their trust funds. You don't talk about mine." I realized that while I'd been careful to treat all the kids equally in daily life, I hadn't talked to Ethan or Sophie about their long-term plans as much. Part of me had assumed their father was handling that, but it was clear they wanted that guidance from me too. Sophie was quieter but agreed with Ethan. She said, "I know it's not our money, but it feels like we're not as important." I assured them that wasn't true and promised to do better. But I also explained that the trust funds were something their step-sibling's mom had left behind and weren't meant as a measure of love. Update 2. After my conversation with Ethan and Sophie, I felt a bit more hopeful. While they still seemed uneasy, I thought I had reassured them that the trust funds weren't a reflection of how much they mattered to me. Unfortunately, this hope didn't last long. My wife, unhappy that I'd spoken to Ethan and Sophie without consulting her, accused me of undermining her parenting. She said, "You're making them feel like they're wrong for wanting the same opportunities as Anna and Jake. How is that fair?" I explained that I only wanted to clear the air and ensure they didn't feel like outsiders in the family. But she was adamant that I had overstepped, and our argument escalated again. She said things like, "If we're really a family, then the lines shouldn't be so rigid." Things took a surprising twist when her ex-husband, Ethan, and Sophie's father, got involved. Apparently, Ethan had mentioned the trust funds during a visit, and it sparked a heated conversation between my wife and her ex. He called me directly to clarify the situation. At first, I was caught off guard. He said, "I'm hearing that my kids are being treated unfairly in your house. Is this about money?" I calmly explained the situation and emphasized that my late wife's inheritance was meant solely for Anna and Jake. To my surprise, he actually sided with me. He said, "Look, I don't want my kids resenting their step-siblings over money that isn't even theirs. That's not how I'm raising them." I was relieved to have his support, but when I told my wife about the conversation, it only deepened the divide between us. She felt betrayed that he agreed with me and accused me of driving a wedge between her and her ex. By now, the tension in the house was palpable. The kids started forming cliques, Anna and Jake on one side, Ethan and Sophie on the other. Small disagreements turned into arguments, and family dinners became quiet and awkward. One night, during an especially tense dinner, Sophie blurted out, "It's not fair that Anna and Jake get everything handed to them while we have to work for everything." Jake fired back, "It's not like we asked for this. It's our mom's money, it has nothing to do with you." The argument spiraled from there, with Ethan jumping in to defend Sophie and Anna trying to shield Jake. My wife and I stepped in to break it up, but the damage was done. Afterward, Anna came to me in tears, saying, "I feel like I can't even enjoy what Mom left us without feeling guilty." Hearing her say that made me furious, not at her, but at the situation. If things weren't bad enough at home, my wife's parents decided to escalate the situation further. They started calling my family, my parents, my siblings, and telling them their version of events. Suddenly, I was fielding calls from my own relatives asking why I wasn't stepping up for my stepchildren. One of my sisters, who's always had a strong opinion about my remarriage, said, "If you're going to marry someone with kids, you need to treat them as your own. Period." I tried to explain the complexity of the situation, but it felt like everyone was focusing on the optics instead of the reality. The breaking point came when my wife's father suggested hosting a family meeting to resolve the issue. He invited my wife, me, her ex-husband, and all 4 kids. I refused, saying, "I'm not putting the kids through more drama just to satisfy your sense of fairness." This caused yet another argument between my wife and me. She said, "You're making this worse by refusing to talk it out." I countered with, "Dragging everyone into a room and making it a spectacle won't solve anything. It'll only make the kids resent each other more." After the blow-up over the proposed family meeting, I realized we couldn't keep going like this. My wife and I were at an impasse, the kids were feeling increasingly alienated, and the tension in the house was suffocating. I suggested we try family counseling to work through the issues, and while my wife reluctantly agreed, it felt more like a concession than a genuine desire to solve the problem. We started with a counselor who specializes in blended families. In the first session, it became clear just how much resentment had built up on all sides. Anna expressed that she felt her mom's legacy was being disrespected. Jake, in his blunt way, said, "Why should we have to give up something that's ours just because it makes them jealous?" On the other side, Ethan admitted, "I feel like we're not as important because there's no plan for us like there is for Anna and Jake." Sophie added, "It feels like we're just extras in the family." Hearing that broke my heart. The counselor helped us unpack these feelings, emphasizing that everyone's concerns were valid but that communication had completely broken down. She suggested we focus on rebuilding trust and connections between the kids rather than jumping straight into resolving the financial issue. The counselor also recommended individual sessions for my wife and me. During mine, I finally got a chance to process my own feelings. I told the therapist how torn I felt, between honoring my late wife's wishes and being a supportive stepfather. She pointed out something I hadn't considered: part of the issue wasn't just the trust funds but how I communicated about them. I had been so focused on protecting Anna and Jake's inheritance that I hadn't done enough to make Ethan and Sophie feel secure about their own futures. In my wife's individual session, she acknowledged that some of her frustrations were rooted in guilt. She admitted that she felt like she wasn't providing enough for Ethan and Sophie and had unfairly projected that onto me. While this was a breakthrough, it didn't erase the tension, it only highlighted how deep the wounds had become. In our next family session, the counselor helped us set some ground rules. We agreed that the trust funds would no longer be discussed in front of the kids. My wife and I also committed to creating a financial plan for Ethan and Sophie's future, separate from Anna and Jake's inheritance. At home, I started having more one-on-one time with Ethan and Sophie. I helped Ethan research colleges and scholarships, something he had been nervous about. For Sophie, we worked on her art portfolio and explored competitions she could enter. These small steps seemed to ease some of the tension, though I could tell the underlying issue hadn't disappeared. Anna and Jake were making an effort, too. Anna invited Sophie to go shopping, and Jake asked Ethan to join him for a video game tournament. These moments felt like glimmers of hope that we could rebuild as a family. Just when things were starting to improve, my wife's parents stepped in again. Her father confronted me during a family barbecue, saying, "I hear you've been wasting money on therapy instead of just doing what's right." I didn't take the bait. Instead, I calmly told him, "I'm not going to debate this with you. My wife and I are handling it the best way we can." He called me selfish and stormed off. Later, my wife apologized for her father's behavior but said, "You have to understand, he just wants what's best for the kids." I replied, "So do I. That's why we're in therapy, not playing tug-of-war over money." The most surprising development came from the kids themselves. One evening, Anna came to me and said, "I know the money is important, but I don't want it to ruin our family. If it helps, I'm willing to give up some of my inheritance for Ethan and Sophie." Her maturity floored me, but I told her she didn't need to sacrifice what her mom had left for her. I explained that the issue wasn't about the money itself but about respecting boundaries and finding a way to coexist as a family. Ethan overheard this conversation and later told me, "I don't want Anna and Jake's money. I just want to feel like I'm part of the family, too." After the conversation with the kids, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Anna's offer to share her inheritance, while unnecessary, showed how much she cared about family unity. Similarly, Ethan's admission that he valued inclusion over money gave me a clearer understanding of what needed to change. I sat down with my wife to discuss the progress we'd made. I told her about Anna's offer and Ethan's heartfelt response. For the first time in weeks, she seemed genuinely moved. She admitted, "I think I've been so focused on the financial aspect that I didn't realize how much this was hurting everyone emotionally." We agreed to focus on creating a stronger bond between all 4 kids instead of letting the trust funds dominate the family dynamic. However, while things were improving inside our home, the extended family continued to stir the pot. My wife's parents didn't take kindly to our progress. Her father sent me a lengthy email outlining his frustrations, accusing me of being selfish and refusing to step up as a real father. He wrote things like, "If you can't treat Ethan and Sophie as your own, maybe you shouldn't have married into this family." I showed the email to my wife, expecting her to defend me, but instead, she looked conflicted. She said, "I don't agree with how he's saying it, but I think he just wants to protect Ethan and Sophie." Her reluctance to fully support me reopened old wounds. I told her, "Your father isn't helping. He's making things worse. If we're going to fix this, it has to be between us, not him." She nodded but didn't offer much else, and I couldn't help but feel frustrated. The situation took an even worse turn at a family gathering hosted by my wife's parents. I didn't want to go, but my wife convinced me it was important to show a united front. Things were civil at first, but as the evening went on, her father brought up the trust funds again. In front of everyone, he said, "It must be nice for Anna and Jake to have a golden ticket while the other kids have to scrape by." I calmly replied, "We've already discussed this. The funds aren't up for debate." But he kept pushing, saying things like, a real father would find a way to help all his kids, not just his favorites. Anna, who was sitting nearby, stood up and said, "With all due respect, my mom worked hard to leave that money for us. It's not about being favorites, it's about respecting her wishes." I was proud of her for speaking up, but the damage was done. The rest of the evening was tense, and we left early. On the way home, Anna said, "Why does everyone keep making this about us? It's not fair." Jake added, "If they can't stop bringing it up, maybe we just shouldn't see them anymore." The next family counseling session was pivotal. The counselor addressed the lingering tension between my wife and me, particularly her hesitation to stand up to her parents. She asked my wife, "Do you think their involvement is helping or hurting this situation?" My wife hesitated before admitting, "It's hurting. I know it's making things worse, but they've always been involved in my life. It's hard to push back." The therapist pointed out that while her parents' intentions might come from a place of love, their actions were undermining our efforts to create a healthy family dynamic. My wife agreed to set boundaries with them, though I could tell it wouldn't be easy for her. With the therapist's guidance, we made a plan to strengthen our family unit. This included clear boundaries. My wife agreed to have a direct conversation with her parents, asking them to stop interfering with our household decisions. Equal time for all kids. I committed to spending as much one-on-one time with Ethan and Sophie as I did with Anna and Jake. Financial planning for everyone. While Anna and Jake's trust funds would remain untouched, my wife and I started a savings account for Ethan and Sophie, contributing as much as we could each month. Family activities. We decided to dedicate one weekend a month to family bonding, activities like game nights, movie marathons, or day trips to build positive memories. To my surprise, my wife followed through on her promise to speak with her parents. She told me the conversation was hard, but she stood firm, telling them, "This is our family, and we're handling it. I need you to respect that." Her father wasn't happy, but her mother seemed more understanding. While it didn't completely resolve things, it was a step in the right direction. At home, the kids started getting along better. Anna helped Sophie with a school project, and Ethan started asking me for advice about college applications. These small moments felt like victories, proof that we were heading in the right direction. For a while, it seemed like things were finally starting to stabilize. The kids were interacting more positively, and my wife and I were working better as a team. The trust fund topic didn't come up again, at least not directly. However, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. The dynamics in a blended family are rarely simple, and lingering tensions often find new ways to surface. It all started with a seemingly harmless school assignment. Sophie had a project where she had to create a future vision board. She included goals like attending art school, traveling, and eventually opening her own gallery. She presented it to the family one evening, and we all applauded her creativity. But then Ethan asked, "So, Sophie, how are you going to pay for art school?" Sophie shrugged and said, "Well, maybe Dad will help, or we'll figure something out." Anna, who was sitting nearby, gave me a quick glance. I knew she was worried about what was coming next. Sure enough, Ethan turned to me and said, "Maybe we can use some of the family savings or, the funds." The room fell silent. Jake muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." Before I could respond, my wife stepped in, saying, "Ethan, we've talked about this. Those funds are for Anna and Jake. We're working on savings for you and Sophie separately." Ethan didn't say anything, but the look on his face spoke volumes. He was clearly upset, and the rest of the evening was awkward and tense. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started pulling away again. He avoided family dinners, spent more time in his room, and barely acknowledged Anna and Jake. It felt like we were back to square one. Sophie, on the other hand, became more vocal. One day, she blurted out, "It's not fair. Anna and Jake don't have to worry about anything, but Ethan and I have to hope for scholarships or loans." I sat her down and tried to explain again. "Sophie, it's not about fairness. It's about honoring what your step-siblings' mom wanted for them. That doesn't mean we're not going to support you. We're doing everything we can to build savings for you and Ethan." She wasn't satisfied. "But it's not the same. Why can't you just share? We're supposed to be a family, aren't we?" To make matters more complicated, unexpected financial challenges started cropping up. The car needed major repairs, and we had an unexpected medical bill for Ethan after he broke his wrist during a basketball game. These expenses made saving for Sophie and Ethan's future even harder, and my wife and I started arguing again, this time about day-to-day finances. She said, "We're working ourselves to the bone, and it still feels like we're falling behind. Meanwhile, those funds are just sitting there, untouched." I reminded her, "We agreed not to touch the funds. This is a separate issue, and we need to find another solution." But the stress was wearing us both down. I could feel the weight of trying to balance everyone's needs, and for the first time, I started questioning whether I was doing the right thing by sticking so rigidly to my principles. We brought these new challenges back to counseling. The therapist suggested that while the trust funds shouldn't be touched, we needed a clearer plan for the future. She encouraged us to revisit our financial priorities and set realistic expectations for what we could provide for all 4 kids. The therapist also recommended a family meeting, not the kind my wife's father had wanted, but one facilitated by her. The goal was to give each child a chance to express their feelings and work toward a better understanding of the family dynamic. The meeting was tense at first. Ethan was reluctant to speak, and Sophie was visibly upset. Anna and Jake seemed guarded, as though they were bracing for another round of accusations. The breakthrough came when Anna spoke up. "I know it feels unfair, and I hate that this money is causing problems. But you have to understand, it's not like we're swimming in cash right now. This is for later, when we need it." Jake added, "We're not trying to rub it in your faces or anything. We didn't ask for this situation, and we don't think it's fair to you either." Hearing this seemed to soften Ethan and Sophie's perspective. Ethan admitted, "I guess I just feel like I don't know what my future is going to look like, and that's scary." I reassured him, "We're going to figure it out together. Your future is just as important to me as Anna and Jake's." Sophie asked if there was any way to make things feel more equal. My wife suggested starting a family goal fund, a small savings account for shared opportunities, like vacations, extracurriculars, or other group activities. While it wasn't a perfect solution, it was a step toward making everyone feel more included.